name is Dan, and this is SLAYsmr, an ASMR channel where every week I whisper about a different horror movie that I love. This week, in the true spirit of Halloween, a celebration of my favorite time of year, and I'm guessing many of your favorite times of year as well, I'm going to be whispering about 2007's Trick or Treat, written and directed by Michael Dougherty. This was a pretty obvious choice for me if we're talking about filling October with films that really are emblematic of the holiday. It's funny because you have Halloween, obviously, which is like the granddaddy of Halloween films or horror films. You have a lot of other horror movies that I think are maybe a bit more famous than Trick or Treat, but I can't think of a single film that embodies the atmosphere of the Halloween holiday better than Trick or Treat. And I include Halloween in that. Obviously, Halloween came first, and it's always going to be a classic. It will always be my favorite. It's a legend in its own right. But if we're talking about a film where just everything oozes Halloween, like the holiday is just packed into every frame, I have to go with Trick or Treat. It takes place in a suburban town in Ohio, where Michael Dougherty, the writer and director, is from. Not that I think the town is fictional, but he's from Ohio. And when we start off the film, there's a news report talking about how big of a deal Halloween is in this town, and so we just see old school decorations everywhere and parades and people dressed up. I'm imagining this is maybe what the town of Salem is like at Halloween. I've never been to Salem, but I've looked up pictures, and I also just watched Hubie Halloween on Netflix, which we will not be talking about on SLAYsmr, but that takes place in Salem and has a similar vibe to Trick or Treat, just in terms of the aesthetic of the neighborhoods. They're very different movies, obviously, but just everywhere you go in this film, it is Halloween, Halloween, Halloween in all caps, and I love that about it. And I wonder if, Salem aside, I wonder if there are a lot of towns like that in real life. Growing up, as a kid, trick-or-treating was a big deal. People dressed up, there were houses that decorated, and where I live in Atlanta, the same thing. I'm starting to see some really cool decorations be put up. We put up our own as well. We always, I have coveralls and a Michael Myers mask, and we always fill it with newspaper and have it sitting on the porch so it tricks people. And I get scared by it myself sometimes too. When I go out to turn on the lights on and off, I'll think that someone has just taken the Michael Myers clothes and put them on themselves, and it's gonna get up and scare me. Anyway, there are plenty of neighborhoods that make a big deal about Halloween. When I lived in Austin, the neighborhood I was in, Hyde Park, a lot of the neighbors really went all out and decorated, and it was this big celebration, all that. That being said, the town in Trick or Treat, it's the entire town that goes all out. Like, you cannot go anywhere without seeing some kind of Halloween glory. And in that way, it almost feels like a Ray Bradbury story or something, just in terms of how the town looks. It's almost old-fashioned, even though this movie is very modern and very bloody and very unsentimental. But part of what I love about it is just that Michael Dougherty just goes all in on the aesthetic. Like, this is a town I would like to walk around in around Halloween time. So already it gets bonus points. I mean, from the first frame, you can just tell that this is a Halloween movie for lovers of Halloween. And I definitely count myself in that category, so I love Trick or Treat. I saw it, probably not until 2009. From what I remember, I don't think it got a proper theatrical release, but if you read a lot about horror movies, it had a lot of buzz. It played at some festivals, and you would just hear about it all the time. And I remember some friends and I were actually coming back from, I kid you not, a Kiss concert in Detroit. It was they were playing the venue that they played at in a live Gobo Hall, and we saw them there before the venue got torn down. We were coming back, and I remember someone had finally gotten a DVD of Trick or Treat, and we were going to watch that, so it was kind of a maximum Halloween experience, us going to see Kiss, which is a very Halloween-esque band, and then, knowing we were going back to watching Trick or Treat, and it did not disappoint. Just a few notes about what the movie is and the structure of it and the layout. Like Creepshow, it is considered a horror anthology film, but it's a little bit different in that the segments in it aren't really divided with title cards or breaks or anything like that. It almost takes more of a Pulp Fiction approach. Overall, you have, I want to say, let's see, we have the school bus story, the Little Red Riding Hood story, the Sam story, the high school principal, and then a wraparound story. So there's, I would say, 5 segments, but they're all kind of occurring at the same time. And by the Pulp Fiction model, I mean that the film jumps around in time. So it's Halloween night in this town, and we just see these 5 different horror stories, all that take place at different times throughout the night. So, for instance, the wraparound story is this couple who comes home, and the husband is really into Halloween decorations, and the wife is not, and they're both drunk, and the husband goes upstairs to fall asleep, and the wife starts taking down the decorations outside before Halloween is over, and she gets murdered by this little, it's not a boy, this little creature named Sam, who is wearing little kid orange footy pajamas, a burlap sack with buttons, and is always in search of candy. And what you find out is Sam is kind of the guardian of Halloween. A common thread throughout the story is that he goes after people who break Halloween traditions. So that's the wraparound story, and what we find out is that actually chronologically takes place the latest in the sequence of all the stories in the film. So when we come back to that story at the end, we're seeing all of the different characters that we've seen the other stories go about their business. So it's like the last time we see everyone, if that makes sense. So it's similar to Pulp Fiction in that it jumps around in time, and you don't really know that when the film starts. And I think that's actually one of the pleasures of it, is we could see how everything's connected and when things happened, and something random we may have seen in a story we realize is actually pretty important and connected to another story. And I think that really does separate it from so many anthology films. They could have just gone the Creepshow route and just broken everything up, with title cards. I think even Pulp Fiction does that, but yeah, break everything up with an illustration, a title card. Once we're done with one story, we move on to the next and the next and the next, and this isn't quite like that. Even while the bulk of each story is going on, we're getting little drop-ins of the other tales, and I think that makes it really unique, and it's really smart on Michael Dougherty's part. In the beginning, for instance, after the wraparound story, we don't just jump into the next one. We get kind of 4 introductions of all the stories we're about to see. We kind of check in on everyone before it goes into the bulk of the first story. Then once that's over, we check in with everyone again. Then we go to the bulk of the second story, and so on. I was trying to think if there's another horror anthology film that's like that, and I don't think there is. Let me know in the comments if I'm wrong, but usually everything's a little bit more cut and dry. And so I really admire that Michael Dougherty connected everything from the beginning. I think it leads to more complicated and therefore more interesting world building on his part. Now, what's interesting is that both in the opening and closing credits, we do have comic book drawings of all the different stories in the vein of Creepshow or Tales from the Crypt, kind of giving a nod to the anthology format of EC Comics and lots of other Halloween anthologies or horror anthologies that came before this. But I would say Trick or Treat leans not quite as heavily on a comic book aesthetic as Creepshow. We're not seeing animated interludes. We don't see any animated borders or comic book graphics throughout. It's more just a nod, and they did, I think, after the film came out, adapt it into a comic, so it works well as a comic, but it's not visually quite as indebted to the EC Comics format as some of the other anthology films. But yeah, and when I first saw it, I never really thought how different it was. It was really upon this rewatch that I realized its organizing principles are quite unique for an anthology horror film. And we're supposed to get a sequel at some point, but I don't know. Michael Dougherty has gone on to direct Krampus. Maybe we'll do that one at Christmas. And then Godzilla King of the Monsters that came out just a couple years ago. Or was that last year? What is time? I don't know. But either way, this was his first feature, and he's since gone on to do some really big budget, wonderful films in my opinion, but I really hope we get a Trick or Treat 2. Hopefully with a better title than Trick or Treat 2. I'm also realizing too that I mentioned Kiss earlier, and Gene Simmons of Kiss is in that other horror movie called Trick or Treat from the 80s that I've never seen. I hear it's not great. Have you seen it? Let me know. So, that's kind of the background of the film. Now we should definitely go into the stories themselves. And they're all very different. I feel like each of them hits a different kind of Halloween archetype. So I talked about this wraparound story a little bit, which is, more than anything, it's just a bookend. And it's the introduction of Sam, although we don't really know that until later on. And it's funny too, because Sam kills people. It's funny when you think of Michael Myers. I know John Carpenter and Deborah Ellis, part of the thing they wanted to do was, let's have a killer who uses Halloween imagery as a means of tricking people and eventually killing them. So, in Michael Myers' case, carving jack-o'-lanterns, dressing up like a ghost, putting someone in front of a tombstone, and all of that is very much in line with the holiday. But I feel like Sam from Trick or Treat takes it a lot further. For instance, a giant candy bar that has a razor blade in it that he can kill people with, a pumpkin jack-o'-lantern lollipop, so it's like a big lollipop with the face of a jack-o'-lantern on it that he bites and then uses it to slice people. I mean, it's a little over the top, but I love it. And so I almost feel like Sam is the ultimate Halloween killer. Michael Myers operates within the holiday, but I feel like Sam only uses things from the holiday to kill people, as we discover. Oh, and I should say, one of the other unifying principles of the movie is Sam. He pops up in every single segment, even the ones where he's not the main star. He's sort of always present at the carnage that ensues on Halloween night, particularly around people who break the rules of Halloween. So, first up we have the principle, which is riffing on the myth of always checking your candy. Like when I was a kid, my parents would check we'd get a pillowcase full of candy every Halloween, and my parents would go through everything, and anything that was either homemade or not wrapped, they would toss out. And I don't know, I might eat my words on this, but I'm not sure how many people actually go after kids like that on Halloween with, poisoning apples or putting razor blades in them or whatever. But it's definitely a fear that's in the air. And what Trick or Treat does is they show that there's a principal, a school principal in the neighborhood played by Dylan Baker, who I think just always excels at playing the worst people. If you've ever seen Happiness, the Todd Salon, the movie, and then this and Road to Perdition, he always plays these horrible creeps, but they're very square. They're the types of guys who, if you saw them on the street, you wouldn't think of anything. They're kind of dorky almost, and then you find out that they're awful. What you find out in this is that he is literally poisoning the neighborhood children with cyanide, and this is like within the first 5 minutes of the movie. So you know what kind of film you're getting into. There's this troublemaking kid who's going around and smashing jack-o'-lanterns, poisons him, and it's almost this dark comedy of him trying to bury the body, and his son keeps calling for him to come inside so they can carve a jack-o'-lantern. And the twist, of course, is that the son is in on it. The jack-o'-lantern is this kid who's just killed. It's his head, and his son and him go and carve it at the end. So it's kind of a nice little dark twist on that. I could be wrong on this. The kid that the principal goes after looks to me like the kid from Bad Santa. I should have looked this up before we started. I don't know if I'm correct in that. But if it is the kid from Bad Santa, that would be pretty funny, because it's almost like an evil version of him, because the kid in Bad Santa is similarly gluttonous, and even has that part where he like sneezes chocolate, and in this movie he's vomiting chocolate. So there's a running theme there. So that's the first thing we see. And like I said, all of the stories kind of pop up into other stories, and this is not the last we've seen of the principal. The second story is a group of young women, the main one being Anna Paquin, and they're going out on the town for Halloween night, and they keep talking about Anna Paquin, it being her first time, right? And what you think is that they're talking about maybe losing her virginity. And of course, as it progresses, you find out they're not talking about that these women are actually a group of werewolves, and they are gathering in the woods to kill their dates. And this is the first time that Anna Paquin has done that. And what you find out is her date is actually the principal from the first one, who is not only a child killer, but is just a serial killer throughout the town. He has a mask on and this set of fake teeth he's using to kill women. And he gets his comeuppance, and I feel like they have to give him his comeuppance, right? You can't show this guy killing a kid in the first segment and not have him get some kind of vengeance enacted upon him, even though the kid he kills is horrible. He's a child killer. He has to get his comeuppance, and he does, for Amanda Paquin and this group of werewolves. And I've actually been thinking about werewolves a lot lately. I would say they are maybe my favorite horror monster. I love vampires, I love the mummy, I love the creature, whatever, but I think the werewolf is maybe my all-time favorite. But then at the same time, I feel like there's very few good werewolf movies in Hollywood. You have An American Werewolf in London, The Howling, of course. There's an HBO movie from the 90s with Mario Van Peebles about these half-human, half-wolf kind of cops called Full Eclipse, but I don't know if I call that great. If we're talking about stone cold classics, I think The Howling, An American Werewolf in London, The Wolfman. I like Hammer's Curse of the Werewolf, and I would maybe put Ginger Snaps in there. Now, and then, so aside from that, we have other movies where werewolves pop up in them, like Monster Squad, which I love, and Trick or Treat, which I love. I wouldn't call Trick or Treat a full-on werewolf movie, but we get to see these werewolves in the end of this segment, and I think because I love Trick or Treat so much, I appreciated that the werewolf popped up in this. And it's interesting, it's a low-budget movie, so they can't show a full-on transformation sequence like you see in American Werewolf in London and The Howling. You're not getting to see these heels getting stretched out and these legs bending backwards and all these elongated limbs and snouts and all that, the way they accomplish it here. And I think this is a smart workaround on Michael Dougherty's part. The women actually rip their skin off. They just rip it off, and underneath are these anthropomorphic wolves. And I think that gets around having to spend a ton of money on transformation, because all you really have to show is the skin getting stripped away. It's like rubber or latex, and then I'm guessing they had 2 or 3 werewolf puppets that they were able to use. And you see just enough. You get in the final seconds of the segment, you get to see a few of the wolves just chowing down on some victims. And what I love about animatronics / puppets is that when they dive in, we just see the tops of their heads, and we see them shake around the meat like a dog. because they're puppets, there's an almost unnatural element to their movement, which I think is super scary. The way their heads are thrashing around, it looks very inhuman because it's not human, it's not even alive, it's a puppet. But it's like I said about Jaws, I think the unnatural movement actually contributes to how scary it is. My one complaint about the movie, it's literally my only complaint, is that during the feasting sequence, we hear Marilyn Manson's cover of Sweet Dreams Are Made of These, by Annie Lennox, Eurythmics. And I don't know, it's just a little on the nose to me. And it's also a pretty dated song. I think because I was in middle school when Marilyn Manson first came out with his first few records. I just feel like he's such an obvious choice, an obvious sonic choice for wanting to make something creepy. It's like, oh, we want it to be dark and disturbing, we'll turn to Marilyn Manson. It just seems so obvious in a way the rest of the movie isn't. So if I could make one change to Trick or Treat, I think it would be to have some kind of different song playing over this werewolf feast. I don't even dislike the song, it's just, I don't know, it just seems stereotypically gothic. I feel like it just doesn't operate in the Trick or Treat aesthetic, but those are small potatoes, right? This is still an excellent movie. The next segment, and maybe the one I think that disturbs me the most, is about this group of kids who are playing a prank on this misfit girl and taking her down to this quarry where supposedly a bus driver who drove special needs children to school back in the 70s actually drove the bus into the quarry and drowned them because their parents didn't want to have to put up with their burden anymore. So supposedly the parents paid him to do this. And so these modern day kids are taking this misfit girl to the bottom of the quarry and saying that, oh, the kids are still there, they haunt this place. And soon enough they see them, and of course we find out that it's just the modern day kids playing a prank on this poor girl, but she's really traumatized from it. And in the middle of her freaking out about this, the real kids, dead kids, do come out from the quarry and attack them, and she has a choice whether to save them or not, because she's in this elevator that gets to the top of the cliff, and she's in there, and she chooses not to save these kids who've tormented her. She just goes in the elevator by herself and lets them get massacred by these ghost children. And the reason this segment is so unnerving to me, it's not just the subject matter, which is disturbing itself. Once again, there's a lot of horrific child death at the hands of adults in Trick or Treat. It's the masks that these kids from the 70s have on. I think I will always be disturbed by homemade paper mache masks. I feel like around Halloween time you always see these BuzzFeed articles that are circulated about, oh, check out these creepy old-timey Halloween photos. And I think part of why the masks from back then are so scary is because these highly detailed rubberized masks weren't so popular yet, Just the technology wasn't there and pop culture wasn't what it was. Today we didn't have this glut of superhero costumes and whatever else. I mean, they were around, but I felt like you saw a lot more homemade costumes back then. And so these kids, they all have very simple cardboard or paper mache, a vampire mask, a skull mask, a rabbit mask, and there's just something about that slightly old, antique Halloween photo aesthetic that is really unnerving to me, and that's how these kids look. And then on top of that, they're caked in mud. They've been at the bottom of a quarry for decades at this point. So I think as far as the creepiest looking monsters in Trick or Treat, the school bus story takes the cake for me. So far we have the Halloween tropes or archetypes of ghosts, the vengeful ghosts, werewolves. I would put vampires in there too, because when Dylan Baker is dressed as when he's going around killing people, he's using this set of fake vampire teeth. It's almost a red herring. Like, you think the main villain of that segment is going to be a real vampire, and you find out the villain is him. He's not an actual vampire. And then the monster they're actually leaning on is werewolves. And then just, I would say, serial killers with Dylan Baker, and then you see Sam doing his thing. But Sam, in the beginning, they almost make it look like Sam is going to be this creepy kid, and he's not quite that, as we find out in the next and final segment, where he is terrorizing Brian Cox, who's this kind of crazy old guy who you see pop up in the first segment with Dylan Baker, as Dylan Baker's trying to bury the body. You see his neighbor calling for help from his window, and you don't really know who it is, and you find out in this later segment that it was Brian Cox, because Sam has showed up at his house and is attacking him, and Brian Cox is banging on the window. Now, throughout this segment, it's great. Sam and Brian Cox, who you find out is the bus driver from this last segment, so I'll call him the bus driver. You find out that, or you don't find out, you just see them kind of go after each other and tear apart each other. The bus driver manages to shoot Sam, and Sam manages to cut him. I mean, it's really this kind of all-out brawl for 15 minutes or so. And Sam gets unmasked, and I guess the best way I could describe him is that he's a pumpkin child. His head looks like a jack-o'-lantern with a skull in it, and he seems to be indestructible because anytime a limb gets cut off or he gets shot, you just see pumpkin guts spill out, and the pumpkin strings, or whatever, they're able to reattach his limbs. And I think that's great because Sam's already creepy on his own. You probably don't even need an explanation for what he is, and sometimes when they do the explanations in horror movies, it's not good. It actually ruins some of the mystique. But I actually think the makeup or the puppet or whatever it is for Sam is cool enough looking, and I feel like we haven't really seen too many pumpkin human hybrids in horror movies, so I feel like it gets originality points too. And then on top of that, it's not just that he looks creepy. They take what he is and they take the makeup and they think about how that would affect his internal landscape. So, okay, he's a pumpkin kid. That means he's gonna have actual pumpkin guts. And what can those pumpkin guts do? They can reattach limbs and actually make him a really formidable foe. And I love seeing when that kind of thought is put into creature design. And I actually didn't know this until this rewatch. Michael Dougherty actually animated Sam in, I think, 1996 for this short called Season's Greetings, where it's just a 3-minute cartoon you can watch on YouTube. You see Sam walking around and you see him, kill an adult that goes after him. It's definitely just a sketch of what was to come, but you can tell that, I mean, as far back as 96, this was Michael Dougherty's monster, his boogeyman that he was going to create, right? I feel like it's been in the back of his mind, and he really puts it to good use in Trick or Treat. So at the end of this segment, you find out that Sam actually just wanted candy from the bus driver, so he takes it and he leaves. The bus driver seemingly survives, and then you find out he is actually the bus driver from a picture of him and the kids. And then, of course, in the final moments in the movie, he looks out and he sees the couple from the beginning of the movie. He sees the werewolf girls going home for the night. It's sort of this epilogue, like everyone's doing their thing. And of course, the bell rings and the ghost kids show up, and the final shot of the movie is him having to face them. It's funny, I don't know what the origins of this is, but I said this with Creepshow. I do feel like with anthology horror movies, vengeance is such a big theme. I feel like that format, it's unafraid to show characters doing really horrible things and then giving them really horrible comeuppance for it. From Creepshow to Tales from the Crypt to Trick or Treat, I feel like revenge is just such a common theme, and maybe it's because those movies are not the most thematically rich films. I don't mean that as a knock. I mean that they're not trying to make any kind of huge social commentary. It's really just about looking cool and being nasty, right? And revenge is a really nasty thing, but also a really satisfying thing to watch. I mean, I love that they show Dylan Baker's principle. Literally do the worst thing you can do, kill a child, and then he gets mauled to death by a werewolf. I mean, that's what you want to see in this kind of movie, right? Same thing with the bus driver, who they paint a little bit more sympathetically. He seems to have some kind of remorse, but still at the end of the day, he killed, I think, like 8 kids. So yeah, he has to get his revenge. You're almost disappointed when you find out it's the bus driver and Sam leaves. You're kind of disappointed that there wasn't more revenge. And then the movie delivers with that final stinger. It's great. Yeah, so that's Trick or Treat. Like I said, it's a Halloween staple for me at this point. I mean, Halloween, the movie Halloween is my favorite, but Trick or Treat, I think, really captures the feel of walking around in a Halloween fantasy land. It makes me want to live in this town, within reason, of course, because I wouldn't want to get killed by a werewolf or a murderous principal or bus driver or whatever else. But it makes you want to be in it. Something they talk about on the Psychoanalysis podcast, which I've mentioned here, is the idea of comfort horror. Horror movies that are scary, but also just make us feel good, and they put us in a world that we want to be in. And I may have mentioned that on the Halloween episode, but I feel that way in Haddonfield, and I feel that way in the town in Trick or Treat. I think it's called Warren Valley, Ohio. Don't quote me on that. I think that's what it's called, though. So I always love revisiting it, and on top of that, I just think it's a fantastic anthology. I'm trying to think of a horror anthology that is as good as Trick or Treat from the past 10-15 years. I don't know if I have one. There's some other ones I like. I enjoy some of the VHS films, but Trick or Treat is, in my opinion, almost perfect from front to back. I would just take out that Marilyn Manson song. That's the only change I would make, but it is an excellent horror movie and a fantastic anthology film. I think we need more good anthology films. I want to see someone reclaim the anthology film in the same fashion as Trick or Treat. Not just make it kind of good, not just make it, oh, 1 or 2 of the stories are good, but that all of the stories are knockouts, and I really feel that way about this film. Due a no small part to the aesthetic and the structure. Alright, that's all I got for you all this week. I know I always say it, but like, subscribe, you can see those buttons below, and tell your friends. If you have a friend who's really into ASMR and horror movies, then say, hey, have I got a show for you? We've got more Halloween surprises coming throughout the month. At the end of the month, I'm going to do something pretty unconventional for this channel, something I've never tried before. It might be really embarrassing. I could see it blowing up in my face, but I hope it doesn't. I think it's going to be really cool. I hope you all like it. It's definitely going to be me getting outside my comfort zone for a little bit, and that will be the last week in October, so that will be really close to Halloween time, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, I hope you're safe. I hope you're well. Get some sleep. Don't have any nightmares, except for the good kind. And I'll see you next time.